Alright, so what are we gonna do? We are going to create a set of functions to modify an internal state variable that we are gonna call data. Okay, so our contract is going to have data, and we are gonna have a function called setData, another function called setComputed data, and another function called setMultiplier. Okay, what are we gonna do is, when we call this function, we simply set data to the new value that we are passing. Okay, and then set compute data, what we're gonna do is set data to the value we are passing multiplied by the multiplier. Okay, so imagine this multiplier can be an integer, or uint, as we were doing before, and it can be, let's say, 10. Let's say 10. So we are gonna pass new data, but this data is gonna be multiplied for this number. Okay, and then the result is gonna be the new value of the variable data. Okay, all right, so let's start. Let's say that data is a uint of 256. Let's say it's public, and we're gonna say data. Okay, now let's create a function setData, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna pass a value, and we are gonna call it new data. Okay, this one is gonna be external because, well, with the information that we currently have, we don't know if a function within the contract is gonna be calling it. If that's the case, then we need to change it to be public. But for the moment, let's do it external. Okay, and let's say it's gonna return simple bool. Okay, and then what we're gonna do is data is gonna be equals to new data. Okay, let's also initialize data in the constructor, and we can say data is equals to 100. We can also define that when we deploy the contract, we need to pass the initial value of data. So it can also be something like initial value and initial value. Okay, all right, so notice that I'm using this variable with the underscore. This was it was very common in some contracts to avoid getting confused with some variables. Okay, so all the parameters used to be with an underscore, and then it was easier for auditors and for people to look into the code, because in big code bases it can really get messy. I'm gonna remove it just to be consistent, but keep it in mind. Okay, and now I'm just gonna return true, and it's working properly. Let's test it. I'm gonna deploy, but remember that I need to specify an initial value. So I'm gonna put 200 as initial value. It was deployed correctly. Now I'm gonna check the value of data, and it's 200. Okay, so it's working. If I want to set up a different value, let's say 300, I can just simply use set data. Okay, so I call set data, the transaction was successful, and then I'm just calling data again to see what is the new value. And it's 300, so yeah, this is working correctly. Alright, so now let's do set computed data. We should be like this. It's also gonna receive new data, and this is also gonna be external. In fact, I'm just gonna copy this part. However, remember that we need to have a multiplier, and then we need to calculate computed data. So for that, I'm gonna create another function that is gonna be called compute data. This compute data is gonna receive also some data. It's gonna be internal. Okay, that means that only functions within this contract are gonna be able to call it. All right, and it's gonna return a uint 256. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna return some data, multiply. This is an operator to multiply, and then I need to multiply by multiplier. So multiplier still doesn't exist, so I need to create it, and I'm also gonna do a public, and I'm just gonna call it multiplier. Okay, in fact, we can also specify a multiplier at the beginning. Okay, and then we say multiplier is equals to the multiplier that I'm passing. So I'm gonna use initial multiplier to avoid confusion. All right, and then I'm just multiplying by that. This is internal and is a view. Why is a view? Because it's accessing the multiplier variable that is part of the storage. Okay, so for that reason is a view. Alright, so now we have a multiplier. In fact, we also need to be able to edit the multiplier, right? So we are just gonna do set multiplier that is gonna receive the same. New multiplier is gonna be external, it's gonna return bool, and we simply say multiplier is gonna be equals to the new multiplier. Okay, and then we just return true. Okay, so now we have the capability to edit the multiplier, to set the data, to set computed data, but here we need to call compute data. Okay, so what we're gonna do is I call compute data, and since compute data is receiving some data, we pass this value. Okay, notice how compute data is being called from this function. Then compute data is going to return a new value, and this value is going to be assigned to data. So we can actually do something different here. What we can do is we could make this function public, and then what I can do here is declare a variable, let's say data computed, and this is only living within the scope of this function. And then I can set the data by calling the function setData. Okay, and I say setData, and I pass the data that is computed. Okay, since data returns the same values that set computed data, I can also do a return, and I can say return setData, and that's all. Okay, so the important part here is, if you notice, setComputedData is not being called for anybody in this smart contract. For that reason, is purely external. setData, on the other hand, is called by setComputedData. And initially we thought that it could be purely external. However, when another function is calling this function, we say that it has to be public. Okay? There are some benefits about gas that we are going to see in the future, but it's important to try to have this discipline in terms of the visibility of the functions. It's very, very important. And finally, notice that compute data is internal. So the only ones that are accessed externally are these three functions. Okay, so let's test it. I'm going to click here, and now I'm going to say that the initial value is going to be 100, the initial multiplier 10, and I'm just going to transact, and let's get the values. Data 100, multiplier 10. Alright, that seems to be working. So if I want to set a new multiplier, let's say 20, the transaction was successful. The multiplier now is 20. Alright, and data is the same. Let me set a new value for data. I'm calling, and the transaction was successful. So let's check the value of data. 200. Okay. And let's say now I want to set computed data. So I'm gonna pass 250. So if I pass this value, we are gonna get a bigger number. Okay, let's see what happens. Okay, the transaction was successful. Let's see what is the new value of data. And the value is 5,000. Okay,